If they don't come up with the money within 5 days, now the tenant, and this is not a squatter, but a tenant, is entitled to a 14-day notice that they either have to pay the rent or you're going to begin an eviction proceeding.
Welcome to the Real Estate Show. I'm your host, Christine Koenig, hosting today with
Grace Warren from Howard Hanna Rand.
And
Bob Karulik, the lawyer guy.
all right. So
yeah, it's going to be a fun show
we're
today.
super excited to have Bob with us, as always.
Yes.
I'm a little disappointed, though.
Why?
I came in early on a Monday morning, and usually Frank has a box full of donuts lying around. And guess what? There's
no
donuts.
donuts.
Here today.
Frank, where's the
Can't
donuts?
believe it. Had I known.
You'd have brought your own donuts?
I will say from someone who's here every Monday morning, there are never donuts here on Monday
Yeah. I
mornings.
was like, what are you talking about?
Now I don't know. Now maybe
Once or twice there's been a donut
maybe
here.
once or twice.
Anyway, so how's it been going? I haven't seen you in a while. We've
I
been
know.
on together.
The answer is this: it's the spring market, so everything is busy.
Yeah.
Which I love. It's been great. I got a bunch of listings going, and everything's happening and percolating, and I got a couple things I gotta usher along, right? Like, hello.
Yes, lots of percolating, I think.
Lots of percolating.
I had a very interesting weekend.
Oh.
I went to Pennsylvania this weekend, and I was over near the Maryland border. We were picking up a puppy.
You got a puppy?
We got a puppy. Has nothing to do with real estate, but we did. We got a puppy. It's really for my son.
Yeah.
It was his 30th birthday, and he wanted a puppy, so he actually bought the puppy.
Nice. What kind of puppy did we get?
A border collie.
Very nice. Runner.
Yes.
Very
Yep,
lovely.
We're gonna find
well,
out.
Congratulations. Happy puppying.
We're gonna find out. We have another dog. We have our old 12-year-old
I
West
know.
Highland Terrier.
He's so cute.
And we were hoping that he was going to be okay with him, and she with her, and they seem to be getting along just fine, surprisingly.
Yeah, it's always interesting when you introduce a new pet with an older
Cranky
dog.
Older cranky dog.
Yes, we have an older cranky dog, and we've introduced a cat in the last couple months,
Okay.
and they are now cohabitating happily.
That's good. That's good.
I mean, I think they mostly ignore each other, but nobody's. Every once in a while, Jojo, our little 5 pounds of fury, will kind of like chase after the cat, and the cat's like,
Try to put her in her place.
what's going on?
Yeah.
I guess I'll move to the other side of the room.
Okay, well, I don't know. We'll see what happens with this. Puppy keeps trying to bite the older dog, and the older dog is doing a little growling at her. But anyway, we have a really fun topic today.
We do. We have.
I don't want to waste any time.
That's correct. We have the ever famous Bob Krahulik, the lawyer guy, on with us. We asked him to come in to talk a little bit about a topic that
Hot topic.
squatters' rights, and all things landlord, tenant, rental that you guys may want to ask questions about while we've got Bob here.
Yep. Evictions. That's the topic. It's a question of
Evictions.
who are you evicting? Are you evicting a tenant or a squatter?
Right.
Very
so what's the
interesting.
difference, and how do you determine what the difference is,
Yeah,
and all of that stuff? I mean, here's the thing. Like this TikTok video came out, right? The TikTok video was a guy. I don't know who the guy was. I know he's in jail right now, or he was arrested. But he put this TikTok video out telling people how to squat. And he got in trouble for it, and he was in jail. He lived in a hotel, I think. But he was telling people how to do it and how easy it was. So it just kind of blew up. And now everybody's talking about it, and it is something that's happening, and I think it always has been happening. Is that right? I mean,
Well, it's happened, sure. So let's start with a very fundamental concept, and that is, at what point in time does the occupant of a piece of real estate, a rental property, a house, whatever it is, at what point in time do they receive the protections afforded to tenants under New York State landlord-tenant law? And these concepts are true down in New Jersey as well. And the magic number is 30 days. So what we're talking about does not really apply toward short-term renters. Airbnbs, VRBOs, hotels all fall into one category. And that's the category of occupants who have been there for less than 30 days. If somebody's been residing within a piece of property for 30 days or more, suddenly they're afforded protections as any other tenant in the state of New York, which is as follows. Number one, if you have a lease, or if you're month to month, and you fail to pay the rent, the first thing the landlord's required to do every month that you fail to pay the rent is give the tenant a 5-day notice that the landlord has not received the rent for that month. And you're required to do that whether you are going to evict a tenant or not. If they're 5 days late, bam, you should be dropping that notice in the mail. And that does have to go by certified mail.
And isn't there some sort of a stipulation that you like? It pretty much has to be done on that 5th or 6th day. Like you can't start sending it out 2 weeks or 3 weeks in, right?
You can send it as late as you want.
You can,
So I
okay.
have a lot of landlords who approach me now. They're 6 or 7 months late,
Right.
and I say, well, we need to start by looking at your 5-day notice. And the landlord looks at me; their eyes are wide open. And I said, well, it's a fairly new law under New York. You may have never heard of it, but if they're 5 days late, you have to send them a notice. And before you even begin an eviction, the tenant's entitled to a copy of that notice. So if it's 6 months, I'll prepare 6 5-day notices, and I'll send them out individually. I'm not going to send one letter out because the law is untested. We don't know how judges would treat that. So I'll send 5 or 6 separate notices out, depending on the number of months involved, giving the tenant 5 days notice. You haven't received the rent, they have 5 days to come up with the money.
Okay.
Requirement number 1. If they don't come up with the money within 5 days, now the tenant, and this is not a squatter, but a tenant, is entitled to a 14-day notice that they either have to pay the rent or you're going to begin an eviction proceeding.
So it's 2 notices.
2 notices. And if you're counting on your fingertips, that's 19 days lost right there,
Right. Plus mailing time.
plus mailing time. You're never going to drop the 14-day notice in the mail on the 6th day. You're always going to wait a couple days at least. But at a minimum, that's 19 days. After the 14-day period expires, now you can finally begin your eviction. And the tenant's entitled to be served notice to appear in court. It's called a notice of petition and petition. The petition sets forth the allegations, the fact that you failed to pay rent, and that you are required to appear in court on a return date. And that's a date picked by the court for you to show up and assert a defense if you have any. So this is where it gets tricky. So the tenant's entitled to a minimum of 10 days, a maximum of 17 days. So within that 1 week period, you have to serve the tenant the notice to appear in court. All right, so you're entitled to at least 10 days notice. So you have to pull your calendar out, and if the court gives you a date of June 10th, then you know you must serve the tenant before June 1st. And very important, if you miss the date by even a single day, the case will be dismissed and you're starting all over again. Now, what's the problem with all of this? Most local courts, your village and town justice courts, may only hear eviction cases 1 day a month.
Right.
So if you sent the 14-day notice out and the court meets on the first Monday of every month, and that 14-day period expired on the first Tuesday of the month, now you lost an entire 30 days before you can actually drag them into court. So now we're at 49 days before you've even stepped foot in the courtroom. How problematic the process is here in New York State.
Right.
And then on return date, you show up in court. If the tenant has no defense, the court usually asks the tenant how much time they need to move out. The tenant will ask for months, if not years. Judge will ask the tenant to be a little bit more reasonable. Look to the landlord, say how much time you're willing to give them. Usually 2 weeks would be considered reasonable. And the judge will try to facilitate a settlement where the tenant agrees to move out by a certain date, giving the tenant a little bit of time. If I'm representing a landlord, I'll say to the judge, we'll give the tenant 2 weeks, but only on the condition that the warrant is signed by Your Honor today. And then I'll hold it in escrow for 2 weeks. The tenant fails to vacate within 2 weeks, the warrant gets delivered to the sheriff. The warrant is nothing but a fancy piece of paper with the judge's signature on it. that directs the Orange County Sheriff to remove the tenant from the property by force if necessary.
Right.
That process is pretty interesting. If the tenant doesn't move out.
I've been to that. It's
Yeah.
pretty horrible, actually.
It doesn't happen very often, but when it happens, what's interesting is usually the sheriff's deputy that shows up is a canine unit. And they'll send the dog in first just to make sure there's nobody in there with a gun. And if the dog comes back and the dog hasn't identified anybody in there, then the sheriff will walk through and see if there's anybody still inside.
Wow. Well, we are going to take a quick break, and we will be back to continue with this super exciting topic.
Yeah,
Can you imagine?
I was there to do an eviction, and it was not good. And the woman acted like she never showed up to court.
Right. So, like, she didn't know what was going on.
She had her notices and
Right.
on the door and everything. She knew. She didn't show up to court. And she's like, please, I'll pay you the rent now. So you're out of here.
Right. Why? So we can start this process again?
Right. So somebody asked the question: has there been an uptick in squatting in Orange County? How can homeowners squatter-proof their homes?
All right, so now we'll move right into squatters. And what I'm going to talk about is the warrant, and the problem is the warrant will name the occupant, the person who signed the lease.
Right.
And let's say the warrant says it's Donald Trump.
Let's pick a less inflammatory person
No, you
for our
wanna use that?
conversation.
Joe Biden, less inflammatory.
Why don't we use something like John Smith?
No,
Jingo?
we can't use those names, and you're going to
It has
understand
to
why.
be. It has to be
Okay.
somebody specific. I get it.
So you come up with a name.
Samantha.
Smith. No, I don't
You
know.
could just say Christine Koenig.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Oh
Anyway.
my God, it's crazy. So, I guess we'll get into how homeowners can squatter-proof their homes. Yeah.
So if you tried to squat in my home,
Yeah.
I have handguns.
Right.
I'd call the police and I'd say, there's somebody living in that house and they're in illegal possession of a handgun. Go arrest them.
That's a good one, huh?
And if you're looking for the gun, it's in the top dresser drawer of the cabinet in the master
That's how you
bedroom.
get the police out there?
To arrest them, yeah.
Interesting.
So there are little tips. I heard about one person
What
put a
if you
bunch of
don't
snakes
really-
into the house.
They put what?
Snakes in the house.
Snakes?
Snakes in the house.
Oh, we have a Mr. Krahulik. What is your... Oh, hold on. We'll get there in a minute.
Welcome back to the Real Estate Show. This is Grace Warren, and I'm here co-hosting with...
Christine Koenig, Keller Williams.
And Bob Krahulik, the lawyer guy.
So,
Our topic today is squatters' rights and landlord rights, and but
Squatters' rights.
squatters
Tenant rights.
or maybe not squat. What? Well,
So we just
just
left off
squatters.
with the typical procedure when you've got a named tenant who's not a squatter.
Right.
This is somebody who may have signed a lease or they're just there month to month, but their identity is known to the landlord, to the property owner. A squatter is typically somebody unknown to the landlord and certainly nobody who signed a lease or has entered the property with the permission of the landlord. And the critical difference here is when you evict somebody and you have a known tenant, the summary proceeding, the eviction proceeding, will name that tenant as a defendant in the action. It will name Christine Koenig
Right.
as the tenant who signed the lease, defaulted in the payments, and the warrant will direct the sheriff to remove Christine Koenig from the property. The problem arises is when the sheriff shows up and Christine Koenig is there, still at the property, but there are four people there who say, well, sheriff, she's got to go. But you didn't name me, and you didn't name my brother Alex over there, and you didn't name my sister Sheila. So goodbye, Christine, but we're staying. And the sheriff will say, that's absolutely correct. I'm only empowered to remove Christine Koenig, who is the named tenant in the eviction proceeding. Tenants have figured this out.
and that's even if the landlord doesn't know that these other people are staying with Christine.
That's correct.
Okay.
So what we used to do in the old days, and there's been a change in policy and procedure and law in New York State. In the old days, we would name Jane and John Doe. as additional defendants in the eviction proceeding. So the defendants would be Christine Koenig, Jane Doe number 1 through 5, John Doe number 1 through 5. And the theory was if there are other people also living there, they'd be Jane Doe and John Doe, and the sheriff would be empowered to remove everybody because you, in theory, named everybody as a defendant in the eviction proceeding. And when the papers were served, if anybody was living there, it was incumbent upon them to read the papers, which say, Jane Doe is an individual who is unknown to the landlord, but upon information belief is somebody believed to be residing in the home. The warrant of eviction would also name Jane Doe and John Doe. So when the sheriff showed up in proceeding and you should have asserted your rights, you didn't, so now you're out. Okay. Law changed, policy has changed, procedure has changed. There's actually a very interesting memorandum that I received from the Orange County Sheriff that spelled this all out in black and white for me because I couldn't understand what had happened. And what had happened is that the Sheriff's Department has now guided our local judges that the law has changed and therefore procedure should change as well as the content of the eviction papers. And from now on, if the papers name John Doe and Jane Doe, they will not be recognized as people to be removed from the property. So now when you get your warrant, it does not list Jane Doe, it does not list John Doe, it simply names Christine Koenig. The sheriff shows up, they remove Christine Koenig, everybody else stays. So with that fundamental background, what's happening today? And we had a text message.
So we did. We had a text message that asked if there's been an uptick in squatters in Orange County and what homeowners can do to squatter-proof their home.
Yeah. So there has been an uptick, and what a lot of defendants have learned, a lot of tenants have learned, is that the procedure has changed, and if there are people living in the property who are not named as defendants in the eviction proceeding, they will not be removed from the property. So we see instances where an eviction is started, the tenant shows up in court. Meanwhile, new people have moved into the dwelling. Nobody tells the landlord, nobody tells the judge, nobody tells the court, nobody tells the sheriff. It's a big secret. It's a big game is what it is. People will live knowing that they can stay there for free at least until another eviction proceeding is started designed to evict the squatter.
But the squatter doesn't have a lease, so you're providing 5-day notice to someone who has $0 owed to you. Like, how does that
So the
even
process
work?
is slightly different for a squatter. Squatters are not entitled to the 5-day notice. They're not entitled to the 14 notice to pay the rent. They are entitled to a 10-day notice to either vacate or you're going to begin an eviction. And of course, it'll take the full 10 days. The process is a little bit more streamlined, but still very time consuming, especially in those municipalities where evictions only heard once a month. And the tricky part is you have to figure out who the tenant is.
Right, because you have to name them by name.
Got to name them by name.
And what if you can't?
How do you find that
That's
out?
a challenge. You can ask the court for some direction on how to do this. Maybe the court will say, I'm going to allow you to proceed with Jane Doe or John Doe named as the defendant. And I will issue an order directing the sheriff to remove anybody and everybody who occupies the property. That hasn't been tried, certainly not by me yet. But you've got to perhaps look at mail, look at license plates of cars parked in the driveway. Perhaps the police can help out.
How do you look at mail? Isn't that a federal offense to
Well,
take
it's certainly
someone's
a federal
mail?
offense to steal somebody's mail, but if somebody places mail in your mailbox,
Yeah,
I
or
think you're allowed to look at to whom it's addressed.
Okay.
right, or in a situation
Can't
like
open it, but you can
like
look
where
at it.
we have a rental property. There are no mailboxes. You have to have a post office box. So there's no mail peeping for me. So tell me, what about in a situation where you write your lease, right, and the lease states clearly who the tenants are, and that there is to be no one else, to be added or living at the property without notifying the landlord. If you have that in your lease, does evicting the one person get everyone out?
It does not. It does not. So if you have a default of the terms of the lease where more people are living there than permitted under the terms of the lease, that's the procedure is slightly different. The tenant's in default. You have to read the lease and, number one, see whether or not the tenant is entitled to notice and an opportunity to remedy the default, and usually they are. So many leases will say if there's a default, notice must be given to the tenant, perhaps by certified mail. The tenant will then have, sometimes it's 10 days, sometimes it's 14 days, sometimes it's 30 days to cure the default. If the tenant fixes the problem, that's it, you can't evict them, they're allowed to stay. If they don't remedy the default within that 10-day or 14-day or 30-day period, whatever the lease dictates, then you can start an eviction. Same problem. You need to name everybody living in the property.
Minors included?
Minors, well, I would say no.
Okay.
So if there is a child living in the property and mom is evicted, the sheriff is not going to kiss Junior goodbye and leave them living, leave a 6-year-old living in a house all by themselves. So
About a
there
16-year-old.
are other ways of dealing with that issue. 16-year-old could be challenging. So I will always begin my eviction by naming Jane Doe and John Doe. It's not going to finish that way because the courts will not allow it. But if mom or dad shows up in court, the very first question I will ask is on the record, Judge, I want to know the names of everybody living in the property right now.
Right.
And when the judge asks the tenant who's appearing in court, give me the names of everybody living there, I don't know of any tenant who says, Judge, I'm not going to answer that question. Certainly if you go to trial.
What if they just lie?
Well, that's perjury, and there are other consequences for lying in court. Sometimes you got to bring a case to trial and put the tenant on the stand and under oath. Let them swear to who's living in the property, what is their name, what is their relationship to you. There are ways to get there. Very time consuming, very expensive, tremendous financial loss to the landlord and property owner. Sometimes there's a lot of damage involved in these things too. Now, if there is damage, call the police. It's a crime. A tenant cannot trash your house without criminal consequences. So don't feel as if you're powerless if your property is being destroyed. Call the police.
It's kind of crazy.
So remember, it's 30 days. So if they haven't been there for 30 days, you can resort to self-help. That is, you can remove the person yourself. And I'll give you an example of where that's done.
Oh, I can't wait to hear
On a
this.
very regular basis. Hotels,
Right.
Okay.
which are no different than short-term rentals such as Airbnb and VRBO. Hotels, somebody checks in, they pay to rent a room for one night, maybe 2 nights, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks. As long as it's less than 30 days, when the hotel guest's time to vacate has come and gone, and if they refuse to pay the daily rate, the hotel owner can call the police and have those people removed from the property as trespassers. The same can be done as short-term rental guests such as Airbnb, VRBO. If they have no right to stay on the property, they're trespassing, your local police department should, not saying they will, but they should remove that person from the property. Can you call and hire your cousin Vinny to help remove them from the property? That's where it gets a little bit dicey. You don't want to be found guilty of assault or battery. There are other crimes that you could be accused of if you physically remove somebody from the property yourself. So you have to be wary of that. But in theory, yes, you can take matters into your own hands and remove the person from the property yourself.
And you can remove their belongings as
Absolutely.
well. Interesting. All right, we're going to take a quick break and hear from our sponsors, and we'll be right back with Bob Krahulik. So interesting.
You don't want to give people the idea that they can actually physically remove them, but
No.
I can imagine somebody trying to do something crazy.
Right?
So after 30 days, though, everything changes, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's the problem.
That's so crazy.
So part of the problem is you start an eviction, somebody moves in, and you show up in court, maybe they've only been there for 2 weeks. The sheriff is going to take at least a month before they show up. So even though they move in and 30 days hasn't expired, it's hard to get somebody out if they moved in with a tenant who has a legal right to stay. If somebody just moves into a vacant house as a squatter, that's easy.
Right.
Turn the power off.
So you can turn the power off?
Sure.
We're going to talk about that on air, so save it.
Okay. Oh my goodness.
Uh-huh. So much. It's so interesting. Hey, Bob. Nice to see you.
You too. So you've been traveling a little bit, huh?
I have.
Good.
It's the spring. We got to do the kids' spring break. I mean, then it was the eclipse. Did you see full eclipse?
99.81%.
Where were you here?
It was northern Lake George.
Okay. Was it
Right down at
cloudy
the bottom
there?
of the hill. It was a little bit hazy,
'Cause it was
but as
cloudy
soon as
there.
you put the glasses on and looked up through the sun, no matter how much haze there was, you could see it perfectly.
Yeah, I was impressed about those glasses and with the haze. We were initially up on, I guess, Lake Champlain on the New York side.
Okay. I
And
was
then-
thinking of going to Crown Point, which is on Lake Champlain,
Yep.
but when I saw the amount of traffic, I said, I think I'm going to
Yeah,
stay
how many
right
people
here.
were there?
It actually wasn't terrible. Talk about it the next break. Welcome back to the Real Estate Show. I'm your host, Christine Koenig with Keller Williams, licensed in New York and New Jersey. Hosting today with,
Grace Warren from Howard Hanna Rand Realty.
and our guest today,
Bob Karulik, the lawyer guy here at WTBQ and
The
WGH.
lawyer guy. I love it.
So we're talking today a little bit about squatters' rights. We kind of went through the eviction process if you are on the lease of a property. Then we started talking about like unnamed people who might be living there. And now I think when most people think about squatters, I think they think about what we're going to talk about now, which is someone just shows up and is suddenly living in your space.
Right. We see people in the armed services get deployed, serve our country, and they come back and somebody's moved into their house. What do you do? Well, if they've been there for more than 30 days, as we just discussed, you have to go through the entire eviction process. Even though they've entered the property as a trespasser with absolutely no permission to do so.
How
It's
can
astounding
how would
to
that
me.
person prove they've been there more or less than 30 days? Because if I'm coming home and I find out that someone is here, right, in my mind, they've been there, that's day one.
Well, that's a good question. Cell phone data can certainly prove where somebody's been living and for how long. But how do you find out? So what will typically happen is there'll be a legal proceeding. And maybe that legal proceeding is a result of, and let's say you've decided to take matters into your own hands and you shut off the electricity. You force the person out. No heat, no hot water, no running water. The well isn't working. Completely shut the power off and you force the person out. If they have been there for less than 30 days, you have the right to do that. If they've been there for more than 30 days, you do not. And it's Section 768 of the Real Property Actions and Proceedings Law, which defines when and when you cannot do that. And again, the magic number is if somebody's been living there for 30 consecutive days, you cannot forcibly or even attempt to forcibly remove them from the property. So let's say you do remove them from the property and now they sue you. Maybe they're professional plaintiffs. They've been inviting you to remove them from the property for the sole purpose of starting a lawsuit against you with the hope that they will achieve some type of monetary settlement. They sue you. You have the ability to serve them as part of the discovery process with discovery demands. You can ask for copies of utility bills. You can ask for copies of driver's license, any documents that you think might determine where somebody's been living, school enrollment records, and cell phone data. And you can even subpoena the cell phone company in an attempt to acquire cell phone data about where people were located when certain phone calls were made. And cell phone data can be a very reliable and accurate source to prove where somebody's been living
Right.
or not living. And sometimes that information is absolutely critical to protect yourself from monetary liability if you're accused of unlawfully evicting an occupant of real property. We've heard stories about other clever attempts to remove somebody from a house. I heard one story where somebody dumped a bunch of snakes into the living room and left. I've heard stories of people who've moved back into the house themselves
With the tenant?
with the tenant,
That's a great. Someone in my office asked me to specifically ask you that question.
cohabitating in the same dwelling.
Okay.
They call the police. All you got to do is pull the deed out, say, "Officer, I have just as much right as that person to live here." And in that situation, I've heard of people removing doors from bedrooms and bathrooms to make it as uncomfortable as possible for the occupant to live there together with you as the homeowner. I don't know if that would
Holy
be my
cow.
cup of tea. I have a strategy of my own. It's no secret. I talk about it here on WTBQ. I'm a gun owner. I own handguns. I have handguns secured within my dwelling. And I always thought it would be clever to call the police and advise the police that there is somebody living at my home and they are in illegal possession of a handgun.
No, because they won't have.
They won't
Pick
have a
'em up
permit for that gun.
and lock them up. That might be one way of getting them out.
Untested still.
Untested.
I would think that the police would go there immediately for that, though.
I think they would.
They
If nothing else, I would say to the police, listen, two things. Number one, right now they're in possession of my handgun, and I am not. Number two, they don't have a permit to be in possession of that handgun. And number three, if nothing else, I want you to go get that handgun out of the house for me.
Right.
Yeah.
So it can be secured. I don't have to worry about it being stolen or a minor child getting their hands on it.
Yeah.
What about any gun? Never mind just a handgun. I mean, you might have, a
Sure.
shotgun or a rifle or something like that you're allowed to have that you don't need a permit for, but it's in the house.
It's in the house, but I don't think that's going to be enough to necessarily get them out of the house.
Or to get the police into the house.
Well, I think you can send the police into the house
To
to
get
remove
that.
the shotgun,
Okay.
if it's your shotgun. Especially if you know there are children living there, the police might be more than accommodating. But I always thought that would be a clever strategy to get somebody out.
I'm going to write that one down.
It is a lot. And then, you had mentioned if someone while they're in your home does damage, right? That you should press charges, right? Like, what does that look like?
So
What
it's
is
a
that
crime
process?
for somebody to intentionally damage your home. And that comes under several different contexts. One would be an eviction proceeding. Another is foreclosures. It is a crime for you to damage your own home if there's a lender that holds a mortgage against the property. You can damage your own home if nobody's hurt by the consequences of your conduct, no harm done, no crime committed. But if there's a lending institution involved and you destroy your own house, then that's a criminal act in the state of New York.
Interesting. So we did have a comment or two come in. We answered the one about the uptick in squatters' rights. Someone else just commented, it's disturbing to hear that the laws keep changing to make it easier for criminals to commit crimes against hardworking citizens.
You do hear a push now in New York State on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, looking to pass legislation that would eliminate squatters' rights.
Right.
Because it is an growing problem.
And so we're going back to our first comment, someone asked, how can you squatter-proof your home? Do we have thoughts on what we can do to minimize the chances that someone's going to be squatting?
And with that, what can't you do? Like you said.
We can't shoot them dead.
Okay.
It's good to know.
Good to know that. And you can't turn the power off, you said.
Well, no, you can. So a squatter...
Less than 30 days.
Right.
Well, no, a squatter is somebody who's been there for more than 30 days, and you have to evict them.
Okay.
If they've been there for less than 30 days, I guess we would still call them a squatter, but they haven't acquired any legal rights to continue to occupy the property without court intervention in the form of an eviction proceeding to remove them. So if they've been there for less than 30 days, right? That's the question. What can you do? Oh, real quick before I forget. Somebody moves in. We were talking about this during the break. Somebody moves in the course of an eviction, and they've been there for 2 weeks. And you know they moved in. Tough spot if the tenant is also living there, because how do you get 1 or 2 people out without interfering with the legal rights of the tenant themselves? Sometimes it can be tough. And with the time frame that I'm describing, and this is why people are doing this intentionally, particularly in Middletown and Newburgh, I see it happening. They'll move in by the time the eviction is started, and by the time the sheriff exercises the warrant and removes the tenant, 30 days has easily come and gone.
Right.
So even though somebody moves in illegally and they haven't been there for 30 days, very tough to get them out and very easy for them to establish occupancy rights within that 30-day period.
Right. So that goes back to the, you can still be a squatter after 30 days, you were saying.
You have the legal right to stay after 30 days.
But you're still a squatter.
Well, let's define a squatter. I guess a squatter is somebody who's moved into a piece of property with no legal right to do so.
Be there.
Right.
No legal right to be there. The critical threshold is, have they been there for 30 days or not? If they have not, then you can resort to self-help. If they have, you have to evict them.
Right. And then we were talking about things like turning off the power and things like that. And you said with a squatter.
Under 30 days, you can do that.
But after 30 days.
You cannot. You cannot. It's a crime.
All right.
You also expose yourself to civil liability. So they've been there for less than 3 days. You asked the question, how can you protect yourself from a squatter?
Yes.
Well, let's say you are in the armed services and you're going to be deployed. I guess you have to make sure that house is so airtight and secure that nobody can get in. Almost hurricane-proof your house. Or set up a bunch of cameras in your house. So if somebody does move in, you know, oh my God, there's somebody walking around my living room. I can see them on camera right now. Mm-hmm. You want to call the police.
Right.
I'm in the armed services. I'm over in Afghanistan. And guess what? I have video cameras set up in my house. And there's a robber in the house right now as we speak. I can see them right now on my phone. There's a trespasser. I believe I'm being robbed.
Right.
And the police will go out. If it's within 30 days, they'll in all likelihood remove that person from the property.
So again, playing, I don't want to even say devil's advocate, right? In my realm, let's just say I was away somewhere and I came back and there was someone living there. So I was away for a long term.
The cases we hear about on the news these days are cases where people have been away for an extended period for whatever reason.
Right.
And they had no knowledge of the fact that somebody moved into the
Correct.
house.
That's what I'm saying. So in my mind, they've been there, 2 days, but maybe they have been there longer. Like, I'm still going to call the police because as far as I'm concerned, they have not been there 30 days.
That's correct. Now, I heard this story right here in Warwick, not making this up, over the weekend.
Great.
Somebody had been away, not for a very long period of time, maybe a week or two. They came back and they found 2 pieces of mail in their mailbox addressed to Jose Rodriguez at the home address of the property owner. And there were 2 pieces of mail addressed to 2 different people. They have no idea why. They didn't want to open the mail, but they saved the envelope. And they suspect that this might have been the work of a potential squatter who was trying to set up, establish residency for that 30-day period by having mail delivered, so that if they got into the house and if the police they showed up, they'd say, "What are you talking about? Here's an envelope that was postmarked 45 days ago and addressed to me at this residence. I have been here for more than 30 days." And that's pretty convincing.
That's crazy. Is it?
If I'm a police officer and somebody shows me that piece of mail, I'm going to think twice before I drag him out of the house, because now I'm exposing myself, the police force, and the municipality liability for unlawfully evicting a squatter.
So terrifying, isn't it? Like, you work so hard for your property and that can happen.
We're going to take a quick break and hear from our sponsors. We'll be right back.
Our real estate company. Oh my God, that is insane. crazy, Christine.
It
It's
is.
a great topic, though, because it's so timely right now.
Yeah.
Everyone's talking about it.
Yeah.
And I think that, I don't know.
I mean, we haven't had this much activity on our text thing in a long time.
Yeah, maybe we have to have them on more.
More controversial topics.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy. It's crazy. But I guess the camera thing is the best idea, really.
Yeah.
I hate having cameras in the house.
Yeah.
Because it's like, it's just kind of, I don't know. It's
Creepy.
uncomfortable.
It's creepy.
Especially, even like the Ring doorbell. Like, I wanted to get a Ring doorbell. And Joe's like, you know, this is all online. Like, other people can somehow get onto your network.
Right.
And he's like very weary about that. He's like, I think we should have regular cameras. Welcome back to the Real Estate Show. This is Grace Warren from Howard Hanna Rand Realty and
Christine Koenig with Keller Williams.
So this has been so enlightening.
Yeah. There was one other question that popped up when we were talking about squatters' rights. Are real estate companies training their agents on keeping themselves safe when entering homes where squatters may be present? And the answer is this: as a real estate agent, I don't think we would know that there were squatters were present. And if they were, we would not go in.
Yeah, I would never go in if I thought there was somebody in the house. No. I mean, we knock on the doors usually when we're, but I could see that could happen.
Right, a squatter at a home that's listed for sale, that's been on the market a little bit.
I mean, I know.
Isn't there a tool through MLS that will notify somebody?
A safety, yeah. There's
if you enter the house, I think there's something.
So you can set. We have an app that is like Bluetooth enabled to get us in the home, and so
it's the lockbox.
It's the lockbox app. Yes.
Yeah.
And so you can have a setting that says, upon entering the home, I've got 1 minute, right, to click a button to say I'm safe and everything's good. If not, that sends out A, loud noises, and B, a phone call to your emergency contact.
It is frightening, though, like, the thought of that happening. We could...
I feel like as long as...
I won't go into a house if I'm showing it and I know that there's somebody in there that wasn't supposed to be
No,
in
of course not. I will say this. I have found if I don't think about all the different things that could go wrong in my day, things are much better for me. That's a true story.
I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum. I'm always thinking about what could go wrong, what could go wrong, what could go wrong. So, and I'm always having anxiety about it. So,
well, there we go. Let me help you with your anxiety. Just don't think about it.
So back to a question we asked before the break: how can you protect yourself from a squatter? Ask yourself this: if you are a snowbird. Mm-hmm. And you spend 181 days of the year down in your Florida home.
Yep.
What's happening back in your home in New York State?
Yeah.
And I've installed cameras in all of my properties, and I absolutely love the fact that I know exactly what's going on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. For two reasons. Number one, I know nobody's squatting.
Right.
Because I'd get a notification that a camera's been activated, and I can look and see what's going on.
Do you have it on the inside of your house or on the outside of
Both.
your house? Both.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because I on my property that I have overseas, we have it on the outside. We don't have any in the inside.
And number two, sometimes I'm just curious. Wonder what's going on up in New York State. How much snow are they really getting?
Right. And then you can
you look at a camera outdoor, maybe off the rear deck toward the backyard, and it's a lot of fun to see just how much snow is piling up. And this stuff is, number one, super easy to install now. It's all plug-and-play stuff. And number two, very inexpensive.
Right.
You can get a 5-camera system for under $200 now, and it is super easy to set up. Absolutely.
Huh. Interesting. By the way, we did have one off-topic opinion question. It's a lot of blue, but I'm going to go for it. Mr. Krahulik, what is your opinion on buying a condo in the state of Florida? I have considered buying, but it seems condo fees are high. And does $500 a month seem typical?
Great question. I would suggest that $500 is not bad. That might even be on the low side.
Yeah.
Two things happening in Florida that you have to be very, very careful of. And this is true anywhere. Tip number one, before we get into the issues down in Florida, before you buy, you want to go back and read the Homeowner Association board of director meetings for the last 12 months. And by reading those meeting minutes, you may learn of issues affecting that particular condominium that you would otherwise never learn about.
Right.
And it's not necessarily that these are secrets, because many homeowners themselves don't know what issues their board of directors is struggling with on a day-to-day basis. Whether it's a leaking roof, whether it's insurance premiums that are going through the roof, whether it's structural problems with the foundation of the entire complex. Let's talk about Florida. A bunch of things going on in Florida. Number one, as a result of that condominium collapse that occurred about a year ago now or so, dozens of people got killed. There were structural defects in the concrete foundation of that condominium building, and the whole thing came crashing down. As a result of that, condominium boards were then compelled to go out and hire engineers and investigate the existence of structural defects in every building throughout the entire state of Florida. As a result of that, many defects were identified, and condominium associations were required to undergo expensive repairs. Some might even just call it simple maintenance, but whatever it was, very expensive costs to remedy or prevent a problem from becoming very severe. That can increase your monthly payments dramatically. That can also result in the imposition of a one-time lump sum assessment,
Right.
which some people can afford and some people can't afford. Number two, as a result of these problems, insurance premiums have gone up. And it's not just structural defects associated with the building, hurricane losses. And they're predicting a very busy hurricane season this year already. The possibility or the likelihood or past history with hurricanes can result in an increase in insurance premiums. And in some cases, people are finding it impossible to get insurance. And this is whether it's a condominium building or a single family house. If you are in a flood prone area or in an area that's subject to hurricane risk, some Floridians are finding it very, very difficult to even get insurance. That creates all kinds of problems. If you can get insurance, it can be very, very expensive. So you really have to do your research and understand what you're buying, the issues that are affecting that property, investigate insurance beforehand, and always consider flood insurance, whether you're in a flood zone or not.
I don't think that $500 a month seems like a lot.
God, no.
At all, because they, in many cases they're getting their lawn taken care of. They're getting, all kinds of stuff taken care of.
Pool maintenance, tennis courts, whatever they got, plus roofs and.
And one of the benefits of owning a condominium is you get a break on your real property taxes, because the homeowner association is paying real property taxes on all the common areas and on the building.
Right.
So your monthly common charges a portion of it goes toward real property taxes, and in return, the assessment on your particular unit tends to be very low. Your annual homeowner's insurance premiums tend to be very low as well. So $500, like we were saying.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like a lot. I mean, there are places around here that have that, or very close to it.
Yeah, and as someone is saying, make sure when you're buying a condo, Florida or elsewhere, that you do things like check the age of the roof and stuff, so
That was an
you can get an
issue.
idea of what might be coming down the road.
Other things you want to check: do they allow short-term rentals in your condominium building? If you want to rent it out for a portion of the year, sometimes you have to enter into a 1-year lease. Sometimes it has to be for at least 30 days, and short-term rentals are prohibited. The other thing you want to be careful of is make sure that it is a condominium complex that is approved by mortgage lenders and FHA for people who qualify for a mortgage.
That's tough to do. There are not very many of those up here at all.
There are a lot of condominiums where the number of units that are owned for investment and rental purposes are so high that many lenders, and if it's not an FHA approved condominium complex, your buyer can't get financing.
Right. Well,
And if you're a cash buyer, great, it's easy for you to get in, but sometimes not so easy for you to sell and get out, because the pool of home buyers is limited to cash buyers only.
yeah.
Issue we have here.
For FHA, it is. for conventional loans. Most times you can get a conventional financing.
Sure.
Every once in a while, something is in such a weird state that you can't. Like for a long time, you couldn't get a loan over at Hidden Valley in New Jersey. So that was
because they
cash
had,
only.
Was there an issue with their HOA?
Yes.
Is that why? Okay.
So, but I think that's actually been resolved. Anyway, case row. So this has been super interesting. Any final thoughts on squatters' rights that we want to roll back to before we?
I think we did a good job covering the topic. What can we do going forward as a state,
Yeah.
as a society? Urge your local politicians to change the law, to give landlords the right to include Jane Does and John Does in eviction proceedings, so that when a sheriff shows up to remove people from the property, they have the legal authority to remove everybody from the property.
Right.
And not get caught up in technicalities because, Jane Doe and John Doe were not named. So guess what? You got to start all over again.
Yeah, I think there should be some sort of legislation introduced, maybe that would, when it comes to someone that doesn't have a lease or the squatter, to have it be more than 30 days. It just seems like outrageous.
Now, by the way, this issue might vary from county to county, and even from city to city. City of Newburgh is very interesting. They don't use the Orange County Sheriff to remove tenants from the property. The warrant is delivered to what's called the city marshal. And the city marshal will very gladly remove Jane Doe and John Does from the property, as long as they've been named in the beginning, as long as their names appear on the warrant of eviction. So a complicated issue. You got to do your research as a landlord and as an attorney representing a landlord to know what you can get away with and what courts will allow, what courts will not allow, what officer is responsible for the removal process, and what their policies and procedures allow you to do.
So now you have heard of this happening more often in Newburgh and Middletown.
Yes.
This is where
word seems to be getting out among the tenant community that there's this new loophole in the system.
Yeah.
And if people are in the business of trying to occupy spaces for free without having to pay rent, word is catching on.
I'm sure there are lots of people listening that may have income producing properties in those places.
Yeah, it's important to know what's going on and do your best to stay ahead of it and protect yourself any way you can. So.
Oh, it's been a really good show.
It has. Bob, thank you so much for coming
My
on.
pleasure.
We always
Anytime.
enjoy it. And Grace, it was really lovely to see you.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to come up with some more controversial topics to get you on with us.
I enjoy being on the radio. I enjoy a challenging topic. I like helping our listeners to the best of my ability. We had a pretty good show. We had a lot of people texting in with their questions.
It was a good topic. So
It was very good.
All right, and Grace, I think you and I are on again next week together.
I believe we are.
So we'll have to come up with something new and exciting. Have a great week, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.